Hello, thanks for tuning in. Today, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit sick, so if you hear my voice going in and out or anything like that throughout the video, I hope that you are able to listen through, and I will pause if it's really bad. But today I'm planning to make a little video about some of my favorite tools or tips as well that I use while knitting to keep myself pain-free and engaged in my projects. So let's just get started. Hi, I'm just editing right now, and I really wanted to jump in to add the message that while I'm recommending these things and saying that these tools / products really helped me to be a better knitter or enjoy knitting more, I think that you don't need any of these. Like I mentioned later that blocking mats, you can use yoga mats, old yoga mats, or towels instead, and that's true for the majority of these. You can find alternatives to products for a lot of these. So if you are knitting on a budget, I hope this video doesn't make you feel like you need to buy these things. That's not what this is for. This is really about, there are ways to make your knitting experience better. And if you can find those, they will make you enjoy knitting more and do it more often. Especially, as we're kind of heading into gift knitting season and real knitting sweater season, I definitely have a huge queue that I'm trying to get through. And so some of these tools really help me to do that, but there are always alternatives, or you can just omit them and still knit. It just might not be quite as seamless, but that's okay. This is, this whole hobby is about enjoying what you're doing and making a nice product and going slow. So you don't need anything, but I hope that, maybe you see one of these products and think I can make that myself, or I can do that myself, and improve your knitting in some regard by watching a video like this. All right, the first thing that I want to talk about today is needle stoppers. So these, let me grab my needle stoppers, are these guys are rubber. I think you can also get foam ones. You typically want rubber or foam, something that's a little bit flexible, that go on the tip of your needles. So let me grab both, like so, to make sure that stitches are not sliding off your project when you're setting it down or trying it on, anything like that. So these stitch stoppers, they're Tulip Japan. They're really cute. I got them a couple weeks ago at Nitty City in New York when I was there, and they were pretty affordable. I think they were like $2-3 for these little guys. They come in different sizes. So this is kind of the medium size, and they'll go mid-range of your needle sizes. You can get smaller ones or bigger ones, but they just go right on the points to make sure that your stitches don't slide off. I think that this is super essential on a project like this, where I have about 250 stitches on my needles. When I'm trying it on, the stitches will slide across the entire set of needles, and I want to make sure that I'm not losing stitches while I do that. And, while I'm storing it, I don't want to put this away at night, put it in my project bag, have my boyfriend accidentally sit on it, or I'm moving it around or something like that, and a bunch of stitches fall off. And then the first thing I have to do when I want to pick up my knitting again is pick up a bunch of stitches. That sucks. I've had that happen to me many, many times, but if you use needle stoppers like this, it stops it from happening. I used these while I was traveling too, and so I felt a lot more comfortable shoving my knitting project at the bottom of a bag, knowing that, it had something to prevent it from sliding off. So I highly recommend using stitch stoppers or needle stoppers if you are traveling with your knits or trying them on. Just anything can put your project at risk for sliding off. So highly recommend just getting a little bit of an insurance policy. Bonus points if they're cute. I love these little tulip ones. I definitely want to get some more cute ones. I love making practical things cute wherever I can, so we'll definitely be trying to find some more cute ones in the future and maybe ask for for stocking stuffers or something like that for Christmas, get a couple more. Maybe just buy them for myself. So yeah, that's tip 1. My second tip or tool to use while knitting that makes the knitting experience a lot easier is barber cords. So this is a barber cord. It is super long and I have a little knot down here. It is just a long length of plastic tubing, so it's hollow. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see a little tip there, but it's hollow. And what you do with them is you put it on the tip of your stitch of your needle like this, and then I have a bunch of, let's say I have a bunch of stitches on here, I can just nicely slide those stitches onto this barber cord and then remove the needle, and I'll have my stitches on here and be able to just leave those on hold if I need to work on something else in my knitting, or get the needles from that project and just leave them on hold for a while, or try the project on. So when I am working a sweater or a tank top in the round and I need a smaller circumference of needles to work in the round, but when I want to try it on, I need it bigger, I will use one of these to slide it on, and then I can safely try on that project without worrying about my stitches coming off the needle. And I get to actually see like what the stitches are actually falling like when they're not bunched up or pulled apart from being on that needle. So super useful. Honestly, one of my most essential knitting tools for larger scale projects. I'll even use these sometimes on socks if I want to try on a pair of socks. And you can see I'm actually using a barber cord right now in this project. So I had to pick up stitches along the whole back to turn some of them into the front and back. I'm making a cardigan, but I had all of these middle stitches that will become part of my neckline that I had to leave on hold. So I just slid a little barber cord on there while I was going through, and now I have them ready to just put my needle back in here. I have to untie this knot, but put the needle back in, slide them back onto the needle, and begin working again. So incredibly useful, highly recommend getting them. You can get them on Etsy if you just search knitting barber cords. You can also, honestly, I've seen on Amazon, I'll try to put a link below, of just like a huge, almost I don't know, a cone almost of the same stuff. I think it's just called plastic tubing. In that case, that you can just buy for like $8, and it's a huge amount of it, so you can cut it as many sizes as you need. But there are also a lot of great sellers that will sell you like 3 or 4 for $6 in different lengths. So I highly recommend getting them. I'll link where I bought mine below. I'll also, if I can, link the just the metal or the plastic tubing as well. So yeah, great tip. Honestly, when I figured out that I could use those, it was kind of game-changing for my knitting, so highly recommend. My next tip is finding stitch markers that work for your project. I really enjoy stitch markers. I think that they make a really great souvenir. A lot of knitting stores while I travel will have like sweet little stitch markers you can get. I've also made some, so I have and use a lot of stitch markers on my projects. So again, using the example of this big cardigan I'm making, there are so many sections of different designs on this pattern. So what I did here was to just add stitch markers across every single different design motif, so that I knew while I was knitting across the row that I had to transition. It made actually following the charts a lot easier. I had to look at the pattern a lot less because it was way easier to read my knitting when past me had given future me or present me like a little, hey buddy, pay attention here, like you need to transition. So highly recommend using stitch markers to just have that little reminder to yourself that you need to do something different in that spot. You know, I use them, of course, when doing a raglan. You have the stitch markers. I'll use them pretty much anywhere across my knits to just remind myself I need to do something different. if I notice a mistake in one row and on the way back, like let's say this stitch here, I did it a purl stitch instead of a knit stitch, and I notice halfway through a row up, I will put a little stitch marker right on my needle where I'm going to need to ladder down, so that when I get back to that spot, when I'm knitting back across, I'll remember like, oh, I need to ladder down in the spot and fix this, and I will be able to fix it. So I love a good stitch marker. Bonus points if they're cute. I have tons of little ones that my mom gave me a ton of these. She recently was at a yarn store in Berkeley, California, and they had like a gumball machine full of cute little stitch markers. So I have like a little mushroom, this little like candy heart one, so sweetheart, and a little duck, so cute. So those are really nice to use. Again, I mentioned I love just using cute things wherever I can. Makes everything a little bit better in life if you have like the cuter versions. But you know, I also just have like these guys that are just little, almost like a safety pin, but they're all plastic and different colors. So the nice thing about those too is you can see right now I have one on my actual knitting, but I also have one, let me find it, on my needle. So it's nice that they can both go on the knitting and on the needle. I also, on a functionality point, love stitch markers that help me count my rows. So this is an example of one where it just, you know, it's a normal row counter where I can turn this to increase the number. Let's make sure I reset it to the correct number. So every time I go across a row, I can twist it once to add. I also have a fair amount of these little guys. I have made most of these myself. I know brands like Twice Sheared Sheep sell some, but I really found that I have a fair amount of jewelry making supplies. I've made some jewelry in the past, and so it was pretty easy for me to just make these with supplies that I'd already had or some things from Joann's. So looks like this is the one I've made, and it has 10 little rings on it, a cute little design at the end, so it's a little bee on this one. And to add to the usefulness for me, I added little seed beads in alternating colors down, so I know that every odd row is going to have a green bead and every even row has a white bead. So that just helps me keep count. So I'll use this if I just know, like, I roughly need to know that I'm doing 40 rounds. So I'll, you know, have this on to know, like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, there we go. That's like a good set. Maybe I'll put a stitch marker on that row to show, like, this is 10, count down like that. The main way I use them though is on things like this cable, where this cable was an 8-row repeat. So I put the stitch marker right before, because I would have a stitch marker here anyways. And before or after every single row, I would just slip this between my needles and go a stitch down, or go one of the hoops down, so that, you know, after the first row, I would have it on this one. After I completed the second row, I'd move it down to this one, and so on, so that I knew when I needed cable without having to check the chart over and over, because I had this thing counting for me. So highly recommend getting some stitch markers of different types, because a lot of them have different functions, and I especially love ones like that are functional and cute, and can really tell you something about your knitting while it is happening. So the next and arguably most important part of any knitting project is going to be your needles. So I highly recommend finding the right needles for both your anatomy, as far as like your hands, your wrists, all of that, as well as the knitting project. So for me, I have a set of the Takumi or Clover Takumi bamboo interchangeable needles, so they're interchangeable as well, which is also very convenient. They're kind of expensive, but if you have the budget, I highly recommend investing in a set of interchangeables. I recommend trying out a bunch of different brands and just like buying the fixed circulars, or if you can, the nice thing about the Takumis is, at least in the United States, Joann's sells them, and you can just buy like a cord and the size you need to get started. You don't have to start with the full interchangeable set. So I highly recommend trying out a bunch of different types of needles before you commit to an interchangeable set. But the interchangeable does make knitting projects easier, I will say. But the point of this is to say that I prefer these because they're like about an average length tip. I think these are 5.5 inch tips. You can also get 4.5 inch tips, or even shorter or longer, depending on the way your hand likes to hold. So I recommend trying a bunch of different types, but arguably the most important part of your knitting needle is your material. So these are bamboo, as I mentioned, and I find that for medium grippiness projects and even super slippery project yarn, like this is merino and a brushed alpaca kind of fluffy yarn held, and it nicely glides on the needle. I can pull it pretty quickly, so it glides nicely, but I'm not worried about it falling off really easily. If I'm working on a bamboo project, which bamboo yarn is a lot slippier, this will also have enough grip on it that it'll stay on the needle nicely without, falling off. So I don't have to like grip onto my project like really intensely to keep the stitches on, and I'm able to go across. So for certain projects, you're going to want to use a wood or plastic material because it's grippier. Bamboo yarn or cotton, I think, is the same, where it's pretty slippy. So you want to make sure that you are using needles that will help grip you, so they help grip the yarn, so that you are not gripping it yourself, which can cause a lot of strain in your forearm, in your fingers, because you're just, holding on, and you can do it subconsciously without realizing, and then be in a lot of pain a couple hours later. On the flip side, like sometimes you're working on a project with very sticky yarn. For instance, my mom knits as well, and she's knitting a shawl in mohair held single and then slub, and so alternating rows of that. It's looking beautiful, but she was having a lot of pain from knitting with just the single strand of mohair on wooden needles. She also has a set of bamboo needles, but she was finding that she really had to push the yarn across because of how grippy it was on the wood. So she recently got a pair of metal needles to complete that project, and has found now that working on it is a lot better. So not only do you have to consider what you like to hold yourself, like generally she also prefers wood bamboo needles, but for certain projects you have to consider, like, do I need more grip or do I need less? And if you know that you're working with a very grippy yarn and you want less tension, less grip, going with a metal needle is going to be better. So super important to consider when you're working on a project what you want to use, what needles you want to use, to ensure that your fingers are not having to do more work by sliding or holding onto the yarn. My next tool or tip is to use the appropriate project bag for your project. So I love bags. I always have. I think that's an inherited thing. My mom's the same way. But I love a good bag. So I have a fair amount of project bags. Some of them were totes. I love a tote bag, things like that I repurposed into project bags. Some of them I bought specifically for project bags. But I do have a fair amount, and I've found that using the appropriate project bag for the size of your project and the complexity as far as like how many other notions you need with it is so helpful when you're working on a project. So again, using the example of my current whip, this cardigan, I was originally using this project bag I have. It's from Weird Knitters, and it's a drawstring closure, and it's about, I should have gotten it, but it's about like that big. It's not huge, and it's drawstring, so it doesn't fully close. And then if you are trying to fit a whole cardigan project with all your yarn and the whip in it, it doesn't fully close. It also only had one pocket right on the front, which meant that all of my notions were sharing one spot, and it was becoming difficult for me to get the notions out that I needed. I'd have to spend like 2 minutes just getting into the bag to actually find them. So I highly recommend, so I actually bought a new bag for that, and I got this canvas tote. It was from Amazon. It was like $10, and it's just a tote bag, but it zips across the top. So it has a zipper that goes all the way across. It's a lot bigger, and it has 4 pockets. So it has a pocket on the inside, which I'm storing the buttons for my project in that I don't need right now, but I want to keep safe and I want to keep with the project. It has 2 big pockets on the outside, which I have tape measure, stitch stoppers, other needle cords, a little pocket on the front as well, which I have like the cable needle I was using. It's just a DPN, pair of scissors, the other needles that I need, and it also has this little keychain spot. Again, this is just supposed to be a tote bag for daily use, so it had a spot to put your keys, and I actually got a little O-ring and have just been storing some stitch markers on it. So I've found, since changing project bags, working on this project has been so much more enjoyable, because part of this is a me problem, but I also have a cat that loves to steal my yarn. He loves playing with balls of yarn. So when I was using that other project bag that wasn't quite big enough, he got into some of the yarn. And you can see like some of these skeins are looking rough because they were being chewed on by a cat. So having the bigger project bag has meant that I can store everything I need, zip it nicely without worrying that someone's gonna get their little paws in there. Like, it seals fully and it's not overstuffed in a way that he can get into it. And I know where all of my notions are. It's easy to get them out. So I highly recommend finding project bag. I also sometimes, if I'm working on a project at home versus when I'm traveling, I will switch it out so that I'll have like I know people really love the Baggu foldable bags as project bags on the go because they're water resistant and fold nicely. They get really small and compact, so it's really easy to throw that in your bag if you're traveling with your knits to make sure that they're going to be safe if you spill something in your bag. And you know, you can really stuff it down if you're traveling with it, so recommend that. And then I also, you know, like I mentioned, have different project bags for different projects. So this is my favorite project bag for sock knitting, or other small like hat sock projects. It's just a pencil case I got on Amazon again, and I can fit 2 cakes of yarn here if I need. It's got a pocket on the back, and this zips open to store some notions, so if I need extra needles I can also access my yarn through there, and 2 pockets on the inside. So it's well pocketed and small enough that I can just put this in the top of a backpack if I'm traveling with it, or you know, keep it next to me on the couch, and again, fully zips to keep little paws out of it. So highly recommend finding project bags that really work for your knitting. It makes the experience a lot more enjoyable, I promise. My next tip that kind of goes along with my tip about project bags is to nicely store your needles and notions when they are not in use. So I know everyone would love to do this, but it can be hard to figure out a system that works for you. So this is the one that works for me. This is again another pencil case that I got on Amazon. I will link it below. And it's got like a nice big main compartment has some pockets on the sides. It's got 2 side pockets, but just a big old space, and I store kind of all of my fixed circulars in here. So there's just one set. I have like a notepad and a pencil in here if I need to take quick notes. I've honestly never used that. I'll probably remove it. Have some DPNs in this little DPN case. Have like all of my tapestry needles in this little guy like that. So kind of a big space that is less organized, but it's small enough that I can easily navigate it, and it fits everything I need into it. And I have, you know, the pockets on the side just to put some special things like butterfly bobbins or stitch fixers, things like that will fit in the side. And then I'll also put in little pouches. This has more Barber cords, all of that to keep this main section organized. There's also a front pocket on here that I have a lot of stitch markers stored in. And then on the back, this is my favorite part, this unzips and it's supposed to be for pencils, but I have put all of my interchangeable needles in here. So there's, you know, this little elastic thing with a bunch of spots, and it just so happens that it perfectly fits my number of interchangeable needles that came with my interchangeable needle set. So I'm using 2 right now, but normally this is completely full with my interchangeable needle set, and it, you know, perfectly zips up. It fits in a drawer I have on my desk, and then when I'm ready to finish a project that I'm working on or start a new project, I know exactly where everything is or goes and can quickly put stuff away or take stuff out and get started or move on. So it's incredibly useful to have everything nicely organized, or, you know, in the middle of a row, I realize like, oh crap, I need something, let me go grab it. I know exactly where it is. I don't have to spend a while searching. And so it just keeps things moving in the process. You know, the less time I spend on other things, the more time I can spend on knitting, and I would much rather spend my time knitting than trying to find a knitting tool. So highly recommend figuring out the storage system that works for you. I can link that specific pencil case, but I think looking for like a larger pencil case is a really great way to start. I also have this pegboard here that has some stuff. I collect scissors and display them, so I have all my scissors up here. I'll have some extra tape measures because I love a tape measure. I have them all over the house, honestly. I also have like this little thing that I've stored some tags or stuff like that in, other stitch markers, this little flower, just to quickly grab or put away, but generally everything's organized, has a place, and makes me happy to look at and go through. So highly recommend doing that for yourself. It just makes when you are working on a project so much better. My next tool that I recommend using, or that I specifically find really useful, is a knitting companion app. So I specifically use the app called Knit and Note. I'll link it below if I can. I have an iPhone, so I'll link it to the App Store, but it might be on other devices as well. And this is so useful for me because I don't print out my patterns. I just keep them on my phone, and I used to just use the file app on my phone and kind of try to scroll through the pattern. But the nice thing about one of these apps, again, I use Knit Note, but there's apps like Knit Companion or Knit in all caps or Knitrino are some other ones that I've seen. I haven't used them, so I can't review them, but I imagine they're pretty similar. Basically though, these are just apps that you can upload your PDF pattern to, access the PDF pattern, and mostly I'm speaking to my own experience with Knit and Note, but you can also add to your screen while you're looking at the pattern, you can add row counters, so you can count certain things, where you just have to tap to increase or decrease the number. There's increase and decrease calculators, and there's areas to add notes. So I love this because I can store a project on there with private notes to myself, the pattern all in one place, and it's just an app that I need to open. It's also great when I'm doing any sort of charted work. There's a ruler that I can put on the screen of the PDF, and so it's just like a ruler that goes across the screen that I can toggle up or down so that I can track like what row of a project or a chart I'm on and move it up or down as I need to complete that. So I highly recommend, if you are a person that uses your phone to read a knitting pattern, or you think you could, I really recommend using one of these apps. It makes it so much more convenient because I don't have to keep a paper pattern with me or keep it nice, because I definitely would end up crumpled at the bottom of my bag. Easy way to just like know I always have my knitting pattern with me on my phone, and that I have some other tools to store notes I make to myself or increases and decreases as I go. So yeah, highly recommend something like that. I will say, I know that the phone screen for a lot of people is too small to read your knitting patterns, especially if you're doing something charted, and I can't recommend a lot for that. I still have pretty young eyes, even though I'm wearing glasses, but I'm able to look at pretty small things, so can't recommend a lot. I know some people will use their iPads for that, if you have an iPad or another tablet, and I think a lot of these apps also work on that, so I highly recommend checking that out. Or, you know, if you need to print your patterns out, there are some really great portfolios to keep your patterns in, but I cannot recommend those. That is not my experience, so that's what works for me. You know, use whatever systems you need, but I hope maybe this is a helpful tip in some regard. All right, the next thing that I highly recommend, and I'm sorry if you can hear someone's moving furniture, of course they are, while I'm trying to film, but the next thing that I highly recommend using is a nice wool wash. So I use the brand Soak, and this is in the scent Fig. I love this smell. There's also a lot of people will use Eucalyptus. I have another one that I really don't like, so I recommend one of these. The other one I have, it's called like Outback Gold, and it was pretty inexpensive, and it has a high content of lanolin in it, so it smells really, really sheepy. So I don't really love using that one, but something like this is super nice. It is a rinse-free wash, so you can also use this for anything else you need to hand wash. You just, you know, put this in while you're blocking your knits or just washing them, and it'll foam up, help your knit get a little bit cleaner, help it smell good. It will, I think this one will condition a little bit as well. It does have some lanolin content to keep your knits feeling nice, but you don't have to rinse it out and agitate the knitting more. So I highly recommend getting one of those. I also find when I use the wool wash, I really don't have to wash my knits again for even longer. Like, it really helps keep them fresh for longer, which is nice because, you know, the less you can wash your knits, the longer they're going to last, because getting your knits wet or agitating them while they're wet is going to be the largest way you can get damage on them. So yeah, highly recommend investing in something like this. And it's not horribly priced. This was like, I bought this in Washington DC on a trip, and it was $12 for 3 ounces, but it has lasted me, like, I got this in February and it's October, so over half a year. So highly recommend getting something like this. It's not too expensive and will last you a long time. The other thing I like to use as well is a spray like this. So this is the Flatter spray. It's by the same brand, Soak. And what you do with this is you spray it on your knits to kind of help de-static or relax the fabric if it's got some wrinkles in it. I'll also sometimes use it just as a refresh spray if, you know, maybe it smells a little bit bad, a little bit musty, like you've left it in your closet or sorry, under your bed all summer and you're ready to get your nice sweater out for the winter or fall. Spraying this on it can kind of help demystify it, get the wrinkles out without having to do a full wash. So highly recommend this. I've also just used it. I used it on this not too long ago just to refresh it. This is a fully silk. This is the Knitting for All of Pure Silk, and especially with the silk, which can get really fragile when it's wet, I've really tried to reduce how often I have to wash this, and so just spraying some of this on it has really helped it stay nice and wearable without me feeling like I'm gonna compromise the knitting fabric. So highly recommend getting some knitwear care products. You know, there's also shavers that are really valuable to just increase the wear of your knits, but I'll focus today just on keeping your knits clean, and I recommend those 2 things. All right, and the final thing I'm going to recommend today is a set of blocking mats. I know a lot of people will just block their knits on a yoga mat or a bunch of towels or like old play mats, which are more affordable and are a great option, honestly, if you are just washing your knits and need a place for them to dry. But I find that blocking mats, which typically have like this 1-inch grid, are incredibly useful for actually blocking your knits when you're trying to meet certain dimensions. So each one of these squares is an inch, so it's an inch by an inch. And so when I'm using these, I know like, okay, I want a 17-inch across diameter, like let's place that out and put my pins there so I can ensure I'm blocking to the dimensions I really need. So I find these to be really useful. This is just one of them. I have a little set here that stores nicely, goes under the couch in my office. I just got it for Christmas, and so it's a very good present. And so I'll recommend that, you know, if you can't afford it now, maybe ask for it for some occasion, because it is incredibly useful. It makes, you know, those final things when you're just like ready to wear your knit, but blocking is such an important step, and especially like with some more complex projects where you want to make sure you block your neckline straight or you're meeting certain dimensions, it can be so much more of a hassle if you are trying to use a yoga mat or a towel or something. Or I've seen people like use cardboard, anything else that doesn't kind of have the measurements on it. It can just make it more complicated, and you don't want to mess up a knitting project at that last step or have to reblock it because you blocked something wonky, and it just, you know, you're so close to the finish line. I find that like once I'm really close to finishing something, I get a little bit sloppy, and so having a tool like this that helps me make sure I'm not being sloppy is just so valuable for getting a good final product that, you know, it doesn't drain me completely or don't lose motivation on. So highly recommend that. And yeah, those are my tools. So I hope one of these is helpful to you, or, you know, I always think it's interesting to hear about how other people knit. You know, all of us are very individual, have our own little techniques. I've learned so many things from watching other knitters talk about their favorite tools or just watching videos of them knit. So I hope that some of these can be useful to some of you. Of course, knitting is so individual in a lot of ways. So if none of these tips stuck for you, just thanks for watching. Like, I hope it was enjoyable, even if it wasn't helpful. So yeah, highly recommend any of these tools, but I'd also love to hear in the comments below if there's anything else you recommend, or if you disagree with one of the tools I recommended, if you found something that's better, I'd love to hear it. I'm always trying to just make my knitting, I mean, the knitting itself is more enjoyable, but always enjoyable, but the things that go along with knitting, always trying to kind of, I don't want to say optimize those, but just make them the most enjoyable they are so that I can spend the best time knitting. So if you have any suggestions for that, I would love to hear below. Maybe let's start a dialogue, or tell me if you use any of these tools already, or if you're planning to. I'd love to hear that as well. So, all right, I'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.